Assalamu alaikum. Dear students, in the last lecture we have discussed about the basic introduction of the electric welding, its advantages and the associated disadvantages. After this we have go for the types of welding methods and the types of welding and how can we classify the welding. And after this we have give some introduction about the resistance welding. Today we are going to discuss about the types of the resistance welding. The first type which we are going to discuss today is the spot welding. The spot welding is used to join two or more sheets of metal. The sheet to be welded are held overlapping between the two electrodes, one movable and other fixed. Before we go in detail, see the figure. Here there is two electrodes. One is the movable and other one is the fixed. We place the workpiece overlap with each other at this point. These two electrodes are connected to the step down welding transformer, and there is the tapping or the rheostat is attached at the secondary end. So whatever the amount of the current or voltage we require to do the welding, we can adjust it from here. And within the electrodes there are some nozzles in order to cool the joint. So the sheet to be welded are held overlapping between the two electrodes, one movable and other fixed. Heavy current is passed through the electrode. Heavy amount of current is passed through the electrode. The pressure is applied from the top electrode by moving it downward. The fusion material takes place at the spot. Whenever there is a huge amount of heat or current is passed, heat is produced and the fusion is made at this spot. The sheet is then moved to another spot weld at the desired location. The time period for each weld will be 1 by hundredth of the second or more. The current may be of the order of 5000 amperes. The voltage between the electrodes about 2 volts. The open circuit voltage is less than 12 volts. Figure 4.4 shows how spot welding is done. As we have seen here, rods, wires and small pieces can also be welded by this method. For the sheets, the time required is about 1 by 50th second for each 0.25 mm of total thickness of the two sheets to be welded. Now, what is the configuration of the spot welding machine? So figure 4.5 shows the spot welding machine. AC supply is given to the primary of the welding transformer through the timer which controls the time for which the current flow. The primary has got tapping, and the particular tapping is selected by a selector switch. With the help of this switch, we can select the amount of the tapping, and it depends on the current requirement to weld the two different pieces of metal. For maximum welding current, the selector switch should be kept in position number 1. If we want to employ the maximum amount of current, we place the switch to the position number 1. The secondary is connected to the two electrodes via this wire to the movable electrode, and by this wire it is connected to the fixed electrode. And these electrodes are made of copper and bronze and are cooled by water, as we see in the previous figure. When pressure is not applied on the foot pedal, then what will happen? The electrodes are kept apart by the spring. By this spring, this movable electrode is little bit upward and the face electrode is at its original position and there is spacing between it. The sheets to be welded are placed overlapping each other between the two electrodes and pressure is applied by pressing the foot pedal. When we apply the pressure on the foot pedal, the movable electrodes move downward and it's held the metal pieces tightly. Thickness and composition of the plates determine the duration and magnitude of current. It varies from 1000 to 10,000 ampere and may flow for a fraction of a second to some seconds. Spot welding is mostly employed in the manufacture of automobiles, refrigerators, and other metal stamping assemblies. Now, what are the advantages of this spot welding? That it has low initial cost, it has higher productivity, less skilled worker can operate this welding, no etch preparation is required, operation may be made automatic or semi-automatic. And the disadvantages include jobs of more thickness cannot be welded. As I say in the previous lecture, that the job mean any material which we are going to weld. High initial cost of equipment and skilled labor is required for maintenance purpose. And the application of spot welding includes it can be frequently used in automobiles and aircraft industries. It is used for making containers, fabrication of steel, household furniture. So all this is about the spot welding. Now we will move towards the projection welding. It is in fact a modified form of a spot welding. As we see previously that in spot welding, we put the spot weld at one point, then we totally move the sheet from one point to another point, and then we again do the spot welding. But here we can do the spot welding in the same way, but at the multiple places at one time. One of the pieces to be welded this way has projections produced by pressure. For example, here there is a worksheet and you see that there is projections on the workpiece which are made before the welding. Heat is produced at the contact and workpiece gets welded at this point. Whenever the huge amount of current will pass through this and the two metal pieces, whenever these metal pieces, we apply the pressure on the upper plate, this projection will automatically moves inward on the other workpiece. And at these workplaces and at these work projections, the weld or welding spot will be made. Heat is produced and the contact and workpiece get welded at this point. It is easy to weld certain parts which cannot be welded by spot welding. When two plates to be welded are of different cross section, then in order to obtain desirable strength, it is necessary to have projections on the thicker plate. So what are the advantages of the projection welding? More than one spot can be welded at a given time. Proper heat balance can be obtained easily. The welds may be placed closer than spot welding. Electrode life is much longer than the life of electrode in spot welding. Appearance and uniformity of weld is better than spot welding. With the projection welding, it is easy to weld certain parts which cannot be welded by spot welding. And what are the disadvantages of the projection welding is that metals which cannot support projection cannot be welded satisfactorily. to meet projection is an extra operation. Definitely huge amount of work is required in making these projections. The initial cost of the equipment required for projection welding is high, as press type machines are required for this type of welding. What are the applications of the projection welding are? It is usually employed on punched where the projection automatically exists. Small fastener nuts can be welded to large components. Projection welding is used for welding of refrigerators, condenser, crossed wire, welding grills, and so on, welding of stainless steel parts. Now we will move towards the seam welding. Figure shows the principle of the seam welding. In this case, wheel type electrodes or roller type electrodes are used and pressure between them remain constant. In spot and the projection welding, there is a single spot or multiple spots in projection welding. But in seam welding, you can see from here that it is a constant or the uniform joint. Seam welding is done in order to produce a continuous joint which may be required for the construction of tanks, transformer, refrigerator, gasoline tank, aircraft, containers, and cylindrical pieces. Seam weld is actually a series of overlapping spot welds. Usually number of spots obtained per meter of the joint are between 200 to 400. These two sheets on which seam weld is required are placed overlapping each other. The current is passed between the two moving electrodes as shown in figure 4.7. The electrodes are to be shape of continuously rotating wheel which also apply pressure on the job. It is used when a continuous joint required between two overlapping metal sheets. The advantages of seam welding include that less overlap than spot or projection weld. Several parallel seams may be produced. Gas tight or liquid tight joints can be produced. The disadvantages of seam welding include high cost of equipment as compared to spot welding set. It is difficult to weld thickness greater than 3 mm. Welding can be done only along a straight line. And the application of seam welding is that it is used for welding of stainless steel, aluminum and its alloy, nickel and its alloys. Now we will move towards another type of welding, which is the butt welding. The figure shows the basic principle of the butt welding. The welding transformer has a comparatively large number of turns on the secondary side and lesser number of turns on the secondary side. Why we do this? Actually, we require the heavy amount of current at the secondary side. The two parts to be welded together are placed touching each other because this one is one part, this one is another part, and we are going to weld these two parts. We place in such a way that they are in contact with each other. And the contact is in such a way that a butt type of joint can be made. The joint which is in between these two parts is called the butt type joint. The pressure is applied in an axial direction of weld. The jobs are securely clamped. A heavy current is passed through them. The heat produced is sufficient to raise the temperature of the material to plastic state. So here the important point is that we give such amount of heat that it melts the two materials in the form of plastic, and the fusion take place at the point of contact when pressure is applied on both sides. This method is used for welding pipes, wires and rod. The voltage required for welding is 2 to 10 volts, and current varies from 50 ampere to several hundred ampere depending upon the material and area to be welded at a time. Now the next type is the flash butt welding. It is similar to the butt welding, but the basic difference is that here the joints are welded together under light pressure and heavy current pass through it, and the arc is formed between the 2 points. Due to poor contact at the joint arcing place, when sufficient heat has been produced by 2 parts are suddenly pressed together and the current is simultaneously stopped, a thin film is produced around the joint which is subsequently removed to give a weld of this type. It is used for welding chains, rail ends, shaft axle. Resistance welding can be applied to iron and steel, brass, copper, aluminum, and certain other metal with eminently satisfactory results. Advantages of flash butt welding includes that it is a faster process, preparation of weld surface is not required, power requirement is less, many dissimilar metals with different melting temperatures can be flash weld, the process is cheap, it offers strength factor up to 100%. And the disadvantages include more chances of fire hazards, metal is lost during flashing and upsetting, concentricity and straightness of the workpiece during welding process is often difficult to maintain. Application of flash butt welding include it is used for welding metal sheets, bars, rods fitting. Flash welding finds application in automotive and aircraft products. It is also employed in household appliances, refrigerators, and farm implements. Power supply for resistance welding. In resistance welding, AC supply is used because of ease and convenience. The supply generally required is low voltage at high current which can be obtained from transformer ranges from few kVA to as much as 1 MVA. The power factor will be about 0.25. The power factor can be improved by connecting capacitors of suitable capacity in parallel with the welding transformer. So all this is about the types of the resistance welding. So for today it's enough, and if you feel any confusion in these type of welding regarding their application, regarding their advantages, disadvantages, or regarding their working principle, you can ask me anytime. Thank you very much, and Allah Hafiz.